My name is Leonard McMahon, and I am in the doctor program at the GTU in political theology in the Department of Theology and Ethics. Religion usually has a bad name, so to speak, in public square right now because it's seen as a divisive factor in our politics, and there's a good reason for that. There's plenty of evidence to support that. However, it's good to remember in our history, American history as well, that religion has often been the source of the healing and repair that has been happening, and that's happened in our democracy. So the civil rights movement is a classic example, of course, but you can go back in prior to that, to the turn of the 20th century. So the idea is, with knowing that has prompted me to think, okay, what is it about religion? How do you do religion in a way that allows it to be a positive source for democracy as opposed to a negative one? One of the things, and this is really important, that people forget, that Christians forget, is that the tradition was never a settled issue. There is no such thing as the Christian faith. The Christian theology and Christian faith is an ongoing discussion about fundamentally unanswerable questions. And those questions we call, systematic theology, right? Well, what is God? Who is Jesus Christ? And what is creation? What is evil? What are human beings? All those are fundamental systematic theological questions. And to keep that conversation going is the point of the theological tradition. What happens is, here's the paradox with religion, the way I view it. What happens is that in order for religion to work in one's life, one has to make a choice. Right? You have to choose something. You have to decide what answer you want. Right? And so early Christians did that, of course, and then medievals, and then moderns and late moderns. Everybody makes a choice along the way. And that's fine. The problem becomes when you forget, as you're living your faith out, that it was actually a choice. As Christians, do not, at some point in our lives, take responsibility for our religious life, then we're at a loss. I think we recognize across the board that an adult or a person of any age who doesn't eventually take responsibility for oneself is missing something. And the same is true with the religious life. And so recognizing that these are choices, right? I believe in my choices, I act on my choices, I live out my faithful choices, but they remain choices. That means there are choices amongst other kinds of choices that can be made, and you want to be in conversation with people who have chosen other things. It depends on how you frame your religious faith, or one's religious faith. If you hold it as an absolute, right, and you hold it as something that is exclusive or immutable, then that creates the tension. Just as any position a person holds as absolute or immutable creates tension when you're dealing with differences across people. But if you hold it with a sense of contingency, that allows the religion to work within you, but it also provides space for a conversation to be generated across difference. And that is what I'm aiming for. And I have developed a whole sort of methodology and a method for doing that, using my initial training in Christian spirituality and in classical spirituality. Developed a method. This is what I do with my consultancy firm. Developed a method for bringing people to a place of contingency, right? Understanding that what they hold so dear has at the heart of it a contingent root. There are many groups out there doing, civic groups and intellectuals and scholars doing work on trying to, develop and improve civic engagement, get people talking across difference. It's wonderful work being done. However, what I've been able to bring through my work, my study here at the GTU, is the theological depth to it. There's a background to it, see, and it goes deeper than I would say anything else I've seen out there, in the sense that it's not just that I learned to listen to differences, and that kind of thing, which is wonderful stuff. You certainly want to learn to negotiate. But if I haven't touched the ground on which I stand first, or let me rephrase it like this. Parker Palmer talks about it as democracy is about tension. It's about holding tension. Right? It's not about answers. It's not about agreement. It's not, practically speaking, it turns out to be about consensus, but it's about holding tension. And how well you can hold the tension is how healthy your democracy is. Okay, fine. If we don't work first through a contemplative process to deal with the tension within ourselves, our efforts to do that across the table are going to be penultimate. They're going to be limited. They might even, eventually they'll peter out, right? In the heat of the moment and in the exigency of, the discourse and whatever's at stake, the urgency of the time, right? We'll hit a wall at some point. But when one practices a contemplative method, you find that you sit on an inexhaustible source of love, compassion, and respect for oneself that allows you to do it with other people. We don't have the strength to deal with rejection and tension right now, and so we fight so hard to win, right? You can't. That's gonna produce nothing but competition and destruction. And so when folks go to the polls soon, I just urge them to, obviously, to vote and be part of the process, because I think voting is not just a matter of counting up the majority. I think this is also a part of social consolidation, right? Even if your vote doesn't count, so to speak, and this is what happens sometimes in various states, people think, well, their vote doesn't count, so why should I, and all that. But you realize, the voting process itself shapes a certain kind of person. It's important. It allows you to join the conversation, right? But as people do that, I just want them to understand, I hope they would understand, that the conversation is the most important thing. It's not about winning the election. It's about creating a community that allows people to feel connected even when they lose and even when they win. See, that's what a democracy is. And that means, again, holding tension, being willing to live with rejection, we live with loss, even when you think the circumstances are absolutely dire. Got to be able to have the moral and spiritual resources to stay connected. And the only way to do that is through some kind of moral and spiritual, contemplative, work, emotional work. There's a place of vulnerability, of deep connection, you can call it the common ground. There's a place where we all touch, but it's inside of each one of us. And not to be found necessarily externally first, right? You can't generate it outside if you don't have it inside first.